And in this study, we looked at environmental footprint of private and business jets. Why do we do that? Like, a few months ago, we had this open sky report, right? So that was looking back over a number of years to see what is the emission that has been produced by aviation. So we come to a conclusion, that it come to a conclusion that there is a lot of emissions, right? So open sky doesn't have a lot of full coverage, so we got about half the emissions if we compare to the few estimation that done with other kind of data set, like OAG data set, which covers all the flights over the world. Those are the common aircraft types that we have. But we were wondering, what are the other aircraft types that we ignored? And it come to a conclusion that there's a lot of general aviation, a lot of the private jet that has been missing from the whole picture. So then we started all this rabbit hole. Yesterday you heard talks from Martin. He says, all this astroturfing going on with open sky, especially for these private jets, right? They don't want you to know who the owner is. And the idea is that a lot of people are really concerned about it. You have seen that there are social media accounts tracking, for example, Bernard Arnault from Louis Vuitton. And there's also, people concerned about celebrities who fly jet as their taxis, right? And so those are actually the number of flights that has been carried out by the aircraft, which try to hide their identities. And the second part, you see the number of kilometers that they've flown each month. And then we were able to look at the emissions, how many tons of emission that they have. The number, I think, doesn't make a lot of sense for you now. 1,000 tons of CO2, what does it mean? Just keep in mind that every year, average person globally will consume emit about 4 to 5 tons of CO2. And I think everyone in this audience probably consume more than 10 tons of CO2. Yeah, so that is kind of rough estimate you can keep in your mind. And also we talk about, all these hypes with Elon Musk and, this drama with Twitter, just to add a little bit fuel to the talk, because there was a Twitter account, automatic account set up to track, the flights of Elon Musk with ADS-B exchange, but also it uses open sky data. So the funny thing is that, one of the tweets he recently tweeted out, he said, "My commitment to free speech extends even to not banning account follow my plane, even though that is a direct personal safety attack." So I went all this, spend all my time on Twitter just to check these funny tweets. Is to show you there's one thing that we actually cares. We don't really care if he's flying, right now to somewhere, or any other person flying private jet to somewhere. But it's really about the impact that we bring because of this private jet. March 2020, just the month that we had the COVID, everywhere is locked down. There were 50 trips, 1 month. Imagine, that's like more than 2 trips a day. And sometimes there are 5 trips. I don't know, I wouldn't even, drive my car 5 times a day to different places. The argument, maybe it's not on the plane, maybe it is, I don't know. 600 tons of CO2. That's the CO2 for all of us in this room 1 year emitted. That's a lot, right? It's quite crazy. So did I choose the amounts that he flew most? Yes, I did. Yeah, but maybe he doesn't flow that much, 20 trips amounts, but still, it's a kind of inequality that we really want to reflect in this kind of study. So recently, also see a lot of talks about the things that are going on in Schiphol, especially people protest. So another irony thing is that there's COP27 happening right now, and people say, well, let's see who is going to this conference, and it turns out to be people who come in with a private jet. We actually don't know who they are. Maybe we can do a little bit more investigative journalism. We can find out. But the fact is that people come to a conference supposed for climate and then they fly a private jet. Yeah, it's just irony, right? So now let's talk about the paper. All this background, I think it's interesting, but scientifically speaking, I think the papers is also try to show that really this inequality in emission, and usually this is part of the data that we throw away. Yeah, We only look at like this passenger jet, but we don't look private jet. So the process as follows. A few months ago, we were talking about this private jet, and there were two approaches that we could just go to the open sky data, download all the jets, all the plane data that we think is private jet, or we start with something that we know for sure is a private jet, has an owner, and we download the data only for those guys. So that's what we did. Thanks to Martin, who provided us the best set ever, containing all the non private jet owners. So we had about 250 jets in this data set, and they carried about like 1,000 to 1,500 flights every month before the COVID, and then come back to the same level after COVID. And then there, compared to the amount of flight that we have for all the network, is 2 to 3 million, right? It's a very tiny bit. It's very tiny bit. You can really easily ignore this part when you do the big data processing. So again, in order to do the whole data processing, we have traffic, we have OpenAP, now we have Happy Marriage. They all have better like logos than me. I need a logo design. By the way, if you have a good idea, let me know. So we start with the OpenSky state vector, and then we download it through the Impala shell. So it's saved as CSV or packet, depending on the data size. We use Chevy's traffic library to do the cleaning of trajectory. Then with OpenAP, we can do the estimation, and then finally we aggregate all the stats from different flights. So here is one example, just Easter egg. You can find out who this plane belongs to. But yeah, you have the flight levels, you have the ground speed of aircraft, you have the vertical rate, and with all these parameters, and then the aircraft type is a Gulfstream. So then we kind of like develop this new model in the OpenAP so we can better accurate estimate the fuel consumption and then the CO2 emissions. So that's what we get, right? And finally, we aggregate all the flights for all these 250 jets, and then we get the overall CO2 emission. Again, take a look. Every month is about between 10 to 15. Let's say 15 kiloton. Kiloton is 1,000 ton. That's about 200 people average yearly emissions, just caused by this 250 private jet. I'll tell you a little bit more later when we scale it up. So who are those guys? I think this probably is one of the things that you really want to know. It's sorted by the emissions, and if you read the names, yeah, it sounds a bit strange, right? It's I mean, I cannot pronounce all the names, but you see you see some well-known ones, yeah, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, but there's also a lot of Russian oligarchs, and it's quite crazy when you see this list, and maybe half of them are Russian. So I don't know. Maybe they don't really care about the privacy, but these are only like open social media data that we could gather. Some of them, you have to be careful that I don't think they fly all the time, right? Those are just flights that belongs to them. They could be one of this and any of the airplanes, but it's very hard to distinguish who actually flies on which airplane. So we kind of categorize per person. We also do the same for companies, right? There are some companies like Evraz, so it's probably the owner, Alexander Abramov. But you also see other companies. Volkswagen. How many aircraft here? Like about 10 aircraft, like private jet. I don't know if they're German. Michael, do you know what's going on with Volkswagen? They're supposed to be on the ground, right? So, oh, yeah. And the train is a competitor, so they have to fly, right? Okay. So, but you see. Very good, very good. So this is kind of like insight that we could look, and feel free to take a look at the paper later on just to try to figure out your favorite company. But we can do this analyze, aggregate by company, by person, and then we also can look at what happens during some special period of time. In this figure, you see March 2020 to about July 2020. So those are the area where COVID happens. A lot of country goes to the lockdown, especially in Europe, United States. And you can see that some people did fly less, with the blue marked as blue. They even stop flying sometimes for a few months. But the others, they don't, right? It's the same flight activities as other. I give a credit to Bill Gates. Maybe he was doing some vaccine related trips, but I don't know. I don't think the others are actually really working for the pandemic at that time. So yeah. You see the drop. This is the amounts that we had looked earlier, yeah, March 2020. And then there's indeed a drop, but if you look at the flight activities, it's really similar to before, right? And after. So maybe that's why he got so super mad, about the COVID and then become Republican. Anyway, let's don't go there. And something else also happened in 2020, right? There's an invasion in Ukraine, and that's one effect that we can see, that there's much less flights carried by Russian oligarchs, and people are still flying. Maybe they're in the airspace that is not constrained, or the aircraft belong to them, but they are not in it. But we see like a significant drop since 2022 March. Then there's Russian private jets. Let's look at kind of flight types, and those are the types that actually I always throw away in my analysis because they are not part of the OpenAV, and it's really small, tiny number of aircraft. But now we think about it. Those are the ones actually flying. Those are the private jets, and even worse, there are big airplanes. Have you seen this one? Like A320, Boeing 737, or A340, all these like large airplanes are flying private. What happened is that when you look at the jet outside, yeah, very nice interior. You have about 5-6 people who can on board, and with A320, yeah, this is what we see normally, right? Everyone is crunched in a small space, 100 people. And then this is actually the A320 in a different world. It's still about 10 people. So that's really like the worst thing you can do is to take a passenger jet and convert it to a private jet. Okay, so that's more or less about the kind of result that we analysis in the paper. And what happens to Bernard right now? It's there's a recent report of 1 month ago. He sold his private jet to stop Twitter activists from tracking his movement. It's a great job, isn't it? Isn't it? Do you really think he stopped flying? Yeah. Yeah, so that's something we're interested. He sold his plane. What is he doing now? When I was watching the videos, I got very curious. I wanted to know all this background. There's so many of the flights. Who are those guys? Happen to be that there's some tail number that we can try to correlate to some more investigative journalism. Belongs to a company called ASL Group. Okay, I've never heard about it. I don't know if any of you heard about it. Yep, Rainer. Flew with them before? Yeah. Oh, another one. Yeah, Charlie Sierra Papa Hotel Bravo. It belongs to someone else, NetJets. So this is one of the big ones. Right? It's also something I don't really pay attention to normally. And last one, one of the last ones, it belongs to Flying Group. All these are companies who rent out planes, charter their planes to private people, so where you can fly with them, but you don't know who they are. That's really the challenge that we have now. And I happen to find this list on the internet. There are so many private jet operators, charters, and really about the biggest one, Wheels Up, flies 160,000 hours every year. That's crazy, right? Let me take out my calculator. So 160,000. Let's say a flight takes about 2 hours, right? That's about 80,000 flights. They have about share of 8.57. So let's say divide by 0.0857. Yeah, that's about in total 993,000 of flights. Let's run it up. 1 million flights every year, private. It's crazy. And if we try to correlate with the emissions that we get, how we do that. Let's look back on some data. Mm, should have been better prepared. Okay, I think there's a good thing we can do. So here we see about 176 tons of CO2 per 12 flights, right? That's about, let's say, 10 tons of CO2. So that's 10 million tons of CO2. 10 million tons of CO2 divided by 5 ton average per population, right? That's 2 million residents of the Earth. So all the private jets count up to 2 million person yearly CO2 emission combined together. That is kind of situation we see here. So yeah, it's not pretty, right? And this is really something that we want to take a further look. Oh yeah, here's the number. So again, coming back to my conclusion and about the paper, of course there's some limitation and challenges we're facing doing this kind of analysis. So 250 private jets, it's just a tiny portion of the market, and there's a limited coverage for exotic islands because sometimes they fly to, let's say, island in the Pacific, Caribbean, and we don't have coverage. Yeah, there's also no coverage in Southeast Asia, Mid East, and Global South. I think those areas, they're also private jet flying. Registration is another problem. We don't know who they own them. It's hard to track them. And it's really the only effort is from social media and the missing information from the owners. And then the last one is everyone seems to going to charter. If you look at this trend, you would think that, oh yeah, perfect, that people start flying less private jet now. But no, they're flying charter now. So anyway, so next step, what we can do, we can look further into the charter flights. The good thing about these are company jets, so we can easily find out information, the registration of those company flights, so we can get a better picture in the future. Try to estimate where the aircraft flies, because one of the flight from, I think, Jeff Bezos is from Seattle, and then the flight end up in the data set. It's hard to know where they're going, but then if you zoom out, it's going to seems to go to Hawaii. So this kind of methodology could help us to identify destinations where you don't have coverage. And next is more aircraft models. So what kind of mistake that I had before is I always ignore the ones that did not have a lot of flights, but they turn out to be those are the really interesting ones that we want to model. So accurate estimation models for those aircraft. And finally, maybe more takedown requests from them. Think about it. Because when they ask you to do a takedown request, they send you who owns the airplane, what is registration, when is registration, when it has been changed ownership. That's perfect, right? That's what we want. With that, thank you very much for